I think thoughts are powerful because they're the essence of who we are. A single thought is like a stitch among thousands that weaves into our identity. This is why it's so important, especially as Christians, to have a healthy thought life and make a habit of renewing our thinking. This series is a reflection on habits of the mind, written by Dr. Archibald Hart. Every idea I discuss in this video comes from Dr. Archibald Hart, including this idea, which reminds us that thoughts are the bedrock of our spiritual life. It makes sense because Paul also reminds us of this in Philippians 4:8. He encourages us to think about things that are true, noble, right, pure, lovely, admirable, excellent, and praiseworthy. But why does Paul tell us this? I think it's because we're actually affected by and often become what we think. Which leads me to chapter 1. You are what you think. I'll open with this quote. Sow an act and you reap a habit. Sow a habit and you reap a character. Sow a character and you reap a destiny. Charles Reed. What stood out to me in this chapter was the fact that we have the ability to choose healthy habits. Horace Bushnell once said, "Habits are to the soul what the veins and arteries are to the blood." We live and die by our habits. Our habits define us, and our thoughts define our habits. Hence the maxim, you are what you think. Your brain is no stronger than your weakest thought, and your character no more virtuous than your most private reflections. As humans, we adopt bad habits quicker than healthier ones. Even though we may not be aware of it, we constantly reason and reflect. It's through this reasoning and reflecting that we develop habits, good or bad. Unfortunately, Hart observes that we're dominated by unhealthy habits. This domination isn't due to a lack of resources or our intelligence, rather, it is because we're unaware of how much influence a single thought has on our being. Have you ever stopped to think about how much our thoughts influence our lives? This chart here shows several major aspects of our lives that are affected by our thoughts. Our spirituality is formed by our thoughts. Our character is forged by our thoughts. Our immune system is influenced by our thoughts. Our emotions are managed by our thoughts. Our behaviors are determined by our thoughts, and our attitudes are shaped by our thoughts. I'll say it again. Whether we know it or not, we are constantly being influenced, and our character is being formed by our thoughts. Needless to say, we should never underestimate the power of thought. Why? Because you are the product of your thoughts. The mind determines who and what we are as individuals. Let's take envy, for example. I'm not willing to assume that you woke up wanting to be envious of someone else. What I am willing to assume is that you heard or saw something that caused you to be envious. In other words, you reacted enviously towards something you saw or heard. But let's break this idea down. We cannot control everything that happens to and around us, but what we can control is our reaction to various things. Catch this. Our reaction is directly linked to the type of person we are. And the type of person we are is directly linked to the type of thoughts we make a habit of thinking. Hart reminds us yet again, every effective person has a wholesome pattern of thinking. Every troubled person has a troubled mind. When thoughts are crazy, life is crazy. And when you think about it, it makes sense. So what are the elements of healthy thinking? Dr. Hart focuses on two key principles. The first principle states, healthy thinking is a habit we have to learn. This principle is linked to our fallen nature as human beings. No one has to teach a child how to lie or steal because lying and stealing come naturally to human beings. Bad habits are a part of our mental wiring, which is why we must do some offboarding of unhealthy habits before we can onboard healthier ones. The second principle states, thought always comes before feeling and action. So, since we know that our emotions are managed by our thoughts and our behaviors are determined by our thoughts, then we can assume by changing our thought patterns, the desired feelings and behaviors will follow. But that's the thing about feelings. They're difficult to control. Since childhood, we're told this because understanding our feelings is a lifelong journey, and in our society, we react with our feelings first. Unfortunately, it has led to some undesired outcomes. Now, I'm not trying to paint feelings in a bad light. Feelings are vital to the human experience. What I am trying to say is we shouldn't solely rely on feelings because feelings can be unreliable. There needs to be a balance between logic and feelings. Dr. Hart said it best. When we respond to life's challenges, we must first respond with our heads, then with our hearts. Whatever we do, we must never use our hearts without our head. A heart without a head is like a boat without a rudder or a train without a track. I think the key here is balance, because we can also limit ourselves when relying too heavily on logic. We can't forget that our faith requires us to walk by faith and not by sight. Sometimes walking by faith and maintaining hope will seem illogical, but I love the way Dr. Hart articulates this point. No one has ever achieved real greatness without the ability to occasionally fly in the face of frigid logic and reason. Most times, hope and faith need center stage. Finally, Dr. Hart ends the chapter reassuring readers what he's advocating for isn't likened to belief systems such as Christian Science. Actually, belief systems like Christian Science aren't linked to biblical principles at all. When I first read the book, I didn't know what Christian Science was, but after some quick research, I learned that those who believe in Christian Science believe only God and the mind have ultimate reality, and that sin and illnesses are illusions which can be overcome by prayer and faith. I'm sorry, but this isn't biblical because Christ didn't die for an illusion. He died for real sins committed by real sinners. Hart leaves us with this final quote. Our task is not only to learn healthier ways of thinking, it's also to break some of the bad habits of thought we've established over many years. With God's help, I believe we can do both. I'll leave you with this question. Positive or negative, what thoughts have you entertained that later became your reality? In the next video, we'll dive into the first healthy habit. See the good in others. In the meantime, if you've fallen, get back up, keep your eyes focused on Christ, and capture every thought.